and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about, is there going to be an oversupply of housing in New Zealand?
Because an oversupply?
Well, after years and years of reading articles about there being an undersupply of housing, I've just written an article for One Roof about whether there's going to be an oversupply, because I'm getting some questions from listeners of the show, comments on YouTube, specifically about the government's controversial fast-track legislation. Now, this is where they have put together a list of almost 150 projects that could be fast-tracked in terms of the consents and the land development. Now, here's the main important point. Up to 55,000 houses could be fast-tracked under this legislation, which is currently going through. And so we want to talk about, where are these houses being built, what sort of houses are being built, and could there be an oversupply throughout New Zealand? Now, why are the government doing this?
Well, because for years we've said that there's not enough housing, and so there's been a lot of pressure on that. And the last government, rather than kind of fix the supply issue, they focused on the demand. So they introduced policies that were kind of anti-landlord, right? They had the interest deductibility rules. They made it tougher to be a landlord, healthy homes, and trying to sort of soften that demand from the investor side so that it kind of took some of the heat out of the market. Now, this government's going on a different approach. They're saying, well, actually, the way we fix it is supply, which I completely agree with. And so they've said, okay, let's try and fast track some of these properties, and so we get some more supply into the economy. And just remember, this supply isn't just 55,000 new houses all of a sudden. That applies to retirement homes, and it applies to some farmland that's going to be rezoned as well. It's not all just one type of property just hitting the market.
Yeah, and it's really important to recognise that this is quite a different approach from the previous government. So the previous government had the MDRS rules, which was where you could build up to 3 houses or 3 units, 3 stories, pretty much anywhere in the major centres. That's what we call brownfields development, because we're taking down an old house, or we've got some backyard and we're going to build some houses on it. A lot of the projects that we're going to take you through, and I'll give you some examples shortly, it's more focused on greenfields development. So taking the farmland, rezoning it, creating whole new suburbs. Now, one of the interesting things about that number, 55,000, a lot of people, myself included, would look at that number and be like, God, that's a lot of houses. But we also need to put it into context of, well, how many properties, new dwellings, are consented every single year? Now, at the peak of the market, around 2022, around 50,000 houses or new dwellings a year were consented. At the moment, we're sitting down at about 33,000. There's been a major contraction over the last 2 years. So you say, okay, we're going to have up to, and it is the upper limit, 55,000 houses fast-tracked under this legislation. That is about 1 year and 8 months worth of supply. Now, if all of that hit the market all at once, that would cause a major supply shock, right?
Absolutely.
Because at the moment, there are only about just over 40,000 houses available for sale on Trade Me. If you added another 55,000 in there, that would be a huge increase.
Yeah.
But this is going to be slowly drip fed through, right? So I was actually on a plane talking to one of the people who are planning to rezone land, and they were kind of saying this is a 10-year project. So I'm estimating that this could cause perhaps up to a 15% increase in supply kind of per year if we stick at the same level. That's by saying, okay, 55,000 houses, that's, 5,500 houses per year over a 10-year period.
And that's assuming that all of the proposed projects go ahead.
And that they build the highest number of houses that they have stated within this proposal.
Right.
So if we look at one of those developments, one is in Orewa, which is up in North Auckland, and it's massive, Andrew, 109 hectare site that they want to turn into 1,250 homes.
1,250 is a lot of homes. That's a whole suburb.
Yeah. Now that's going to include some parks, some riverways, some walkways, all of that good stuff. But it is basically a suburb plonked next to Orewa up in North Auckland. So that's that kind of greenfields development we're talking about. The next one is in Ardmore, which is in South Auckland. And if I pull up a map and actually show you where Ardmore is, Andrew, it's currently, not a lot going on there, right next to Papakura. And when I say not going along, that's not to be offensive to the farmers. I'm just saying not many people live there. But you can imagine that there would be a whole community living there, and they are looking to build around 3,400 homes, right? So huge number. So again, a whole nother suburb chucked next to Takanini and Papakura in South Auckland. And when we go through and we look at a lot of these projects, the vast majority of them are on the outskirts of the cities, right? So if I look at the ones in Hamilton, most of them are what is currently a lot of green land, and they
Mm.
want to build 1,000 houses, 1,200 houses. And so when I'm thinking about the potential impact on supply, it is more likely going to impact the suburbs that are already at the extremities of the city.
Mm.
So if we think about that project up in Orewa, which is real North Auckland, it's probably going to impact
Silverdale.
the Orewa property market compared to something more central like a Henderson or a Glen Innes or a Howick, those kinds of areas that are already built up and don't have a lot of green land around them.
Although arguably, potentially that is a good thing for the area as well. You think about the development of Rolleston and Christchurch, right? The amount of extra infrastructure that goes there, that's had a massively positive effect on Lincoln, which is its neighbouring suburb. It's not like Lincoln all of a sudden became cheaper to buy or cheaper to invest in because Rolleston was moving ahead.
Or maybe there's more demand there. I was actually thinking about the kind of induced demand argument.
Mm.
So if we think about somewhere like Orewa, when you first start building all of those developments, maybe there is a bit of an oversupply because there are only so many people looking for properties in Orewa, even though it is a really nice part of Auckland. But then as there's more supply, you've got more people living there. Then maybe there are more people searching for properties
Mm.
on One Roof, realestate.co.nz, Trade Me, because there's more going on. There's
Mm.
more people. There's going to be more infrastructure, more amenity. The other thing that I was really interested in is, okay, not everywhere has a lot of fast track consents. In fact, if we look at just new housing developments under this legislation, it will have no impact on the West Coast or Gisborne or Tasman in the South Island because there's no projects going on there that are currently within this legislation. So I wanted to look at, well, how many properties are actually going to be built by region? Now, it won't surprise you, Andrew, to hear that Auckland has the highest number of houses built at
Yes.
17,500, right? And you think, gosh, that is a huge number of properties. On top of that, Wellington and Canterbury, over 8,000, up to 8,000 properties each going to be built there. But the most important thing to recognise is it's not surprising that there'd be a lot of houses built in Auckland, Wellington and Canterbury because
More people.
that's where like a lot of the population lives. So we need to look at it as the number of houses per 1,000 people, because this is going to give us a good sense of where could there be an oversupply, right? Because we're building lots of houses compared to the number of people living there. So in Otago, if all of the houses that are currently within the legislation are built, that would be 26 houses per 1,000 people, or 2.6 houses per 100 people there. Was quite a large number. If we compare that to the likes of Auckland, it's more 10 houses per 1,000 people.
Significantly less when you look at it that way.
Yeah, or it's said another way, once you adjust for population, there's going to be 2.6 times more building in Otago compared to Auckland. And what's really interesting is if we look at where those properties in Otago are actually going to be built, bearing in mind that's quite a large region, most of them are not in Dunedin. The ones that I've been looking at are primarily in Queenstown. So there's a lot like around Coronet Peak,
Yes.
which is kind of halfway between Queenstown and Wanaka. There's quite large developments that people want to put in there, which is going to be good because there's not enough houses in Queenstown
Yeah.
anyway. And
How
so
have they chosen how to allocate these
I think
projects?
people applied
Submissions,
and
yeah.
then they go in. But the important thing to note is once this legislation passes, that doesn't mean that everybody gets consent.
No.
No. They get the ability to go through the process in order to get consent.
And then, of course, you might go through that process and either get declined, but also it might just become not financially viable to do that project. And that's one of the big things when you look at these high level numbers and think, holy hell, that could make a big difference to housing. Yeah, it could, but also it might, more realistically, in a lot of cases, not actually end up getting out of the ground.
Well, the other thing is that once the legislation passes, and let's assume that it does, then you get to go to an expert panel of people who then get to either approve it, decline it, or say, we'll approve it based on these conditions. Now, if those conditions mean that you don't build as many houses, then perhaps it's not financially viable and it doesn't go ahead. I think this definitely will lead to more houses being built. The important thing to recognize is where are those houses being built, and are those houses going to be able to be absorbed into the local housing market? For somewhere like Auckland, I'm actually really confident about it. We're talking about 17,500 houses, maybe over the next 10 years. Well, over the next, I think it's 25 years, we're expected to see an increase of about 500,000 people in Auckland, right? So 17,500 houses, those are needed to be able to house all of those people. Now, if you look at somewhere like Otago or Queenstown, that's where it starts to get interesting, because then you say, actually, that's a lot of houses per head of population, especially if some of those are concentrated in Queenstown. That doesn't mean that I think Queenstown's a terrible place to invest, because a lot of these, a lot of the projects that I've looked at are kind of
Filling the gap.
Filling the gap, but really targeted at skiers. You know,
How do you mean?
well, I just gave you the example about Coronet Peak. We don't listen about how it's halfway between Queenstown and
no,
Waikato.
but they're focusing on skiers? You think that's...
Okay, fine.
No,
we'll cut
that's
that part. We're going
absolute
back,
nonsense.
No. Well, you haven't read through the documents, have you, Andrew?
Is it actually genuinely focused on skiers?
Well, I'll show you the bloody project.
All right. I'm just asking.
What do you know? You haven't even read it. Look, Coronet Village.
Okay, all
Project
right.
will develop an alpine village immediately behind Coronet Peak with a new gondola, providing access up to the existing ski area, new ski development and supporting infrastructure.
Okay.
Looks like they're focusing on skiers, Andrew Nicol.
All right.
Yeah, you didn't like that, did you? I was going to cut that out because I thought I was wrong. You gaslighted me.
I love that now that people know that you just cut things out whenever you get it wrong.
You are trying to gaslight me. Now, where are we getting it? And Andrew, what's the kind of timeline on this coming through?
So the goal is actually to get this signed off this year, which is pretty impressive. That's relatively quick. And then it is going to be a long process after that, because whilst getting the legislation is a really important milestone, it's just the start of it.
Yeah, and then on top of that, once the legislation's in place, you've got to apply to get your consent. And usually this is going to be the land developer, right?
Yeah, that'll be a 3-year process.
Once the land developer gets their consent, well, it's going to be fast track, so it might be a bit faster than that. But then they've got to go through the process of dividing up all of the lots. Then they've got to put in some of the streets. Then they're going to have to sell them to builders. Then the builders have to design them. Then the builders have to get their pre-sales for those designs. Like, this is like a 10 to 15 year project, right? So it's important to keep that in mind, even as we hear that 55,000. But I'm actually quite excited because I think this provides some really big opportunities. If we think back to the likes of Rolleston, which I think you started promoting you started talking about a lot 10 years ago. We've seen investors over the last couple of years make hundreds of thousands of dollars out of Rolleston.
Yeah.
Now, some people would have looked at that and said, but there's so many houses going in there. Like, how could prices ever rise? Surely there's going to be an oversupply because there's so much building. But as they built it, people were like, that's a nice city now. I'm going to go live there. And then prices rose quite rapidly over the last couple of years. Right, let's wrap it up there. But please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. For any of you guys listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, you want to see some of the graphs we're talking about, just Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We are so close to hitting our goal of 20,000 subscribers. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve at Night.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back here tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.